Rick Harrison never thought something so ordinary could turn into something so unbelievable. It started like any other day, calm and casual. Rick had decided to renovate a small part of his home, a section of the wooden floor that had grown old and creaky over time. The house had seen many years, many memories, and plenty of stories. But to Rick, it was just home, a place of comfort. A place where he could relax away from the cameras, away from the negotiations, away from the world of buying and selling other people's treasures. This home held his own. He called in a small team to help with the floor, just a few workers who had been doing this kind of thing for years. They arrived early in the morning, brought their tools and began lifting up the floorboards one by one. Rick wasn't paying much attention. He was in another room, answering emails, sipping on coffee, maybe thinking about his next day at the shop. Everything was normal until it wasn't. One of the workers suddenly stopped. He noticed something strange beneath one of the floor panels. It wasn't just dust or old nails. It looked like the top of a box that wasn't part of the flooring, a box that didn't belong. Curious, the worker brushed away the dust, cleared some space, and realized this wasn't any ordinary storage item. It was hidden, deliberately. The corners were buried deep under a beam. No one hides a box like that unless they don't want anyone to find it. The atmosphere began to change. The worker called another man over, then a third. They all looked at it, confused. It was metal, old, rusted, but still sealed. Rick heard them talking and walked over, not expecting much. Maybe it was just an old toolbox or something left behind during earlier renovations. But the moment he saw their faces, he knew it was something more. The workers didn't speak. One of them simply looked at Rick and said, "You need to see this." As Rick crouched down and looked at the box, a strange feeling washed over him. Something about it didn't feel right. It felt too intentional, too hidden. It didn't belong there. His heart started to beat faster, not because of what was in the box, but because of how it made him feel, like the past was reaching up from the ground. He wanted to open it, but something held him back. Logic, maybe, or fear. He didn't know why. He stood up and told the workers to stop everything. No more floorboards, no more tools, just stop. And then he made a call, not to a friend, not to the police. He went straight to the top. He called the FBI. At first it felt strange even dialing the number. Who calls the FBI over an old box found under the floor? But something inside him said this was more than just a box. Something about the way it was buried, the way it was untouched, hidden perfectly for who knows how long. It felt serious. When the agents arrived, they didn't come slowly. They came fast. No sirens, just dark vehicles, quiet movements, serious faces. They entered the house, walked straight to the room, and saw the open space in the floor. They said almost nothing at first. One of them knelt down, studied the box, and didn't even try to open it. He just looked at it for a long time. Then he stood up and made a call of his own. Rick watched it all from a few feet away, frozen, confused, trying to understand what he had just brought into his own life. He had no idea what was in the box, but the way the agents moved, the way they looked at it, it was like they had seen this kind of thing before, but not in a normal house. Not like this. One agent leaned close to another and whispered something. Rick couldn't hear, but he saw the expression on the agent's face change. It went from calm to something else, something serious. The room was quiet, too quiet, and time began to move slower. Rick's mind raced. What if it was nothing? What if it was everything? Who had put the box there? How long had it been buried? Why in his house? And more importantly, why under the floor? The kind of hiding place you choose only when you never plan to come back for what you've hidden. Rick couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was about to open more than just a metal box. It was about to open a chapter from the past he never knew existed. Maybe something from before he even moved into the house. Maybe something left behind by the previous owner. Or worse, something left behind by someone in his own family. His heart was beating hard now, not from fear, but from something else. Curiosity, wonder, suspense. The room felt different now. The air was heavier, the sounds quieter, and in the center of it all was that one box, still unopened, still silent, still holding whatever truth was trapped inside. Rick didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change. What began as a simple home repair was slowly turning into something darker, something deeper, something that would pull him into a mystery he never asked for, and it all started with one small crack in the floor. The air in the room had changed completely, and Rick Harrison could feel it in his bones. The moment the FBI stepped into his house, everything started to feel heavier, as if something big was about to happen, but no one could see it yet. Rick stood near the torn-up floor, looking at the metal box that had brought so much attention. It was still unopened, still silent, but somehow, it had already changed the mood of the house. The agents moved quietly but with clear purpose. They didn't treat it like a forgotten old item. They treated it like evidence. One of the agents knelt down, looked at the box closely, then motioned for another agent to come over. They didn't say much, just exchanged quick glances, nods, and then picked up the box slowly, as if it could break or explode with a wrong move. Rick's heart beat louder with every second. He didn't understand why they were acting this way. It was just a box, wasn't it? But when he looked into their faces, he saw something that made him uneasy. Worry. These were professionals. They had seen all kinds of situations before, but whatever they were seeing now was bothering them. One of the agents whispered into his radio. Moments later, more agents arrived. They didn't knock. They just walked in serious and focused, each carrying gear that made Rick more nervous. He hadn't done anything wrong, but this didn't feel like a simple check anymore. It felt like something was about to be revealed, something dark and hidden that didn't belong in his world. The agents asked him to step out of the room. Rick obeyed without a word. He stood in the hallway, looking through the door, as the FBI surrounded the area like it was a crime scene. He heard bits and pieces of quiet conversations, words like unusual, possibly connected, and secure the perimeter. He tried to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. All he had done was remove some old wooden flooring. That's it. And now his house felt like the center of some investigation he knew nothing about. A female agent came over to him, calm but firm. She asked him how long he had lived in the house, who the previous owner was, and whether he had ever found anything unusual before. Rick answered honestly. He'd lived there for over 20 years. It had always been peaceful, always quiet. There were no signs of anything strange, no hidden doors, no mysterious noises, no history of problems, just a house full of memories. The agent nodded, then asked if his father had ever mentioned anything unusual about the house or the property. That question hit a little harder. Rick thought for a moment. His father had passed away years ago, and they had shared a strong bond, both at home and in the pawn business. But no, his father had never said anything strange about the house. At least not that Rick could remember. Still, the question planted a seed in his mind. What if there was something his father had never told him? What if this box had been placed under the floor during his father's time, or before? Suddenly, Rick wasn't just watching an investigation, he was part of it. The agents started taking pictures of the floor, measuring the hidden space where the box was found, and inspecting the rest of the room for signs of more hidden items. They didn't treat this like a one-time surprise. They treated it like the start of something bigger. Rick felt a mix of emotions, curiosity, fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't explain. It was the feeling you get when you realize you've been living around a secret your whole life without even knowing it. Like finding a locked door in your own house that you had never noticed before. He kept asking himself questions. Who put the box there? Why was it hidden so carefully? What was inside that made the FBI react this way? And why was it under his floor, in his house after all these years? Every time he looked at the faces of the agents, the questions only grew deeper. None of them looked calm anymore. Their eyes showed focus, but also concern. One agent made another call, speaking quietly but firmly. Rick could only catch parts of it. Words like confirmation needed, classified, and potential link. He didn't know what it meant, but it didn't sound good. Then, after what felt like hours, one of the agents opened the box. Rick wasn't allowed to be in the room when it happened. He stood outside waiting, listening. There was no explosion, no loud reaction, just a tense silence. A silence that lasted longer than it should have. Finally, the female agent returned. She didn't say much, only that they had found something serious, something that needed to be taken in for further analysis. Rick asked what it was, but she didn't answer directly. She only said, "You may be contacted again soon." That was it. No details, no explanations, just mystery. The agents carefully sealed the box again, placed it in a secure container, and walked out as quickly as they had come in. The house, once full of quiet comfort, now felt like it had secrets inside the walls. Rick stood in the empty room, the floor still open, a cold breeze brushing in from a window he hadn't even realized was open. He looked down at the space where the box had been, and couldn't shake the feeling that something about his life had just shifted. He didn't know what they had found. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Something had been hidden for a reason, and now that it was found, Rick's peaceful world had changed forever. The room felt hollow after the agents left, like the walls themselves were still holding their breath. Rick Harrison stood in silence, staring at the empty space where the mysterious box had been. That small metal container, hidden for who knows how long, had caused such a storm in a matter of hours. Now it was gone, taken by the FBI, sealed, locked, and carried away without a clear explanation. But what haunted Rick wasn't the fact that it had been removed. It was what had been inside. He couldn't forget the way the agents looked when they opened it, especially that moment when one of them froze and whispered something to his partner. It wasn't just surprise, it was fear, maybe even disbelief. Rick hadn't seen what was inside, but he knew from their expressions that it wasn't something simple. It wasn't coins, or old family letters or forgotten photos. It was something heavier, something more serious. And now, even though he didn't have the answers, his mind kept circling back to one question: what was it that could shake a room full of trained professionals like that? Later that evening, Rick sat alone in the living room. The lights dim, the rest of the house unusually quiet. His thoughts wandered to the box again, playing out the moment the workers had first found it. That box had been hidden perfectly, pushed so far under the beams that no one would have found it unless they were tearing the entire floor apart. It wasn't a mistake, it was meant to be buried. And for all those years, he'd walked over it, sat above it, never knowing what was right beneath his feet. It gave him a strange feeling, like his own house had been keeping a secret from him. Then, slowly, memories started to rise. He remembered something his father had once said, not in a serious way, just casually, during dinner. A story about a man he used to know, someone who hid things in plain sight. At the time, Rick thought it was just one of those stories old men tell. But now he was starting to wonder, was it more than a story? Could that man have been connected to this house? Could his father have known more than he ever let on? The questions multiplied in his head, and with them came a deeper sense of mystery. Rick had spent his life around rare objects, hidden treasures, things with long histories and silent stories. But this was different. This wasn't something found in a dusty attic or brought in by a stranger. This was his home, his space, his family. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. What if the contents of that box weren't just random items? What if they were connected to a person, a crime, or a forgotten chapter of history? And what if someone else knew it was hidden there? Rick stood up, walked back to the room where the floor was still open, and stared at the hole. It was just wood and nails and empty space now, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it still held a secret, like whatever had been pulled out hadn't taken the full truth with it. He crouched down and examined the area again, his fingers running along the edges of the wood. Then he noticed something, scratches on one of the beams, tiny marks as if someone had once struggled to place or remove something from that space. They weren't obvious, but they were there, old, faded, but real. That box had been shoved in hard, and whoever did it wanted it to stay there for a long time, maybe forever. The more he looked, the more he felt a sense of quiet fear growing inside him. What if he had never found it? What if the floor hadn't been weak enough to replace? Would it have stayed there for another decade, another lifetime? Or worse, what if it had been meant to stay hidden until someone else came looking for it? That thought made him uneasy. What if someone, somewhere, still cared about what was inside that box? What if they were watching? He glanced around the room, not because he saw anything, but because his instincts told him to. For the first time in a long time, Rick felt unsafe in his own house, not because of the people in it, but because of the unknown history it was holding. He sat back down, exhausted, his mind spinning. He didn't have the full picture yet, but what he did know was that the box wasn't just a forgotten item, it was a message from the past. It was placed with care, hidden with purpose, and guarded by silence. And whatever had been in it had the power to bring federal agents to his doorstep. That kind of power doesn't come from nothing. It comes from secrets, deep ones, ones that someone, somewhere, wanted to keep buried forever. Now, Rick was left with more than a mystery. He was left with a weight, a silent burden that made him question everything. Who lived in this house before him? What were they hiding? And why had it stayed hidden for so long? His heart told him this was only the beginning. Whatever story that box had started, it wasn't finished yet, and Rick knew, deep down, that the answers wouldn't come easy, but they were coming. Piece by piece, shadow by shadow, they were coming. The next morning felt heavier than usual, like the house itself was waiting for something to happen. Rick Harrison woke up early, but sleep hadn't come easy. His thoughts had been circling all night, spinning around that box, the agents, and the strange way his quiet home had turned into something out of a movie. Even though the box was gone, taken by people who didn't tell him much, the feeling it left behind was still there, thick, strange, and full of unanswered questions. Rick walked through the house slowly, touching the walls like they might whisper the truth to him. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The space where the floor had been opened was now covered with a thin sheet of plastic, just to keep the dust down, but Rick couldn't stop himself from pulling it back and staring at the empty space again. He didn't know why. Maybe he hoped something was still there, something he missed, something the FBI didn't see. But there was nothing, just wood and shadows and silence. He sat on the edge of the floor, running a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of how one small object could flip his entire life upside down. Then his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. Normally he wouldn't answer, but today was different. His instincts told him this call mattered. When he picked up, the voice on the other end was calm but serious. It was an agent from the team who had been at his house, and she told him they needed to speak with him again. Not at his home this time, but at a government office across town. That single sentence made Rick's chest tighten. Something was definitely wrong. He asked what it was about, but she didn't say, just that it was important. The kind of important that carried weight in her tone. Rick agreed, hung up, and sat in silence again. His mind was racing. What could they possibly want now? What had they found inside that box? The drive to the FBI building felt longer than it should have. Every red light felt like a signal. Every turn felt like a step deeper into something he hadn't asked for. When he arrived, they brought him through security, past plain hallways and into a quiet room with no windows. A man in a dark suit entered a few minutes later. He didn't waste time. He placed a file on the table, looked at Rick, and said, "We need to ask you about your father." That name hit like a hammer. Rick blinked. His father had been gone for years. Why bring him up now? The agent opened the file and slid a photo toward Rick. It was a black and white picture, faded but clear enough. In the photo, his father was much younger, standing next to a man Rick didn't recognize. The agent said the man was a person of interest from a case that went cold nearly 4 decades ago. A case involving stolen historical artifacts that had vanished without a trace. And now some of those missing items, according to early examination, were found inside the box buried beneath Rick's floor. Rick couldn't believe it. His father, the man he trusted, the man he'd learned everything from. He remembered how careful his father always was, how he never kept anything at home that didn't belong to him. Or so Rick thought. The questions came fast. Did Rick ever see this man in the photo? Did his father ever speak about items that couldn't be sold or shown? Did he ever hint at things better left buried? Rick answered honestly. He knew nothing. And that was the truth. But it didn't stop the weight from settling deep in his stomach. If the FBI was connecting this to his father, then maybe the box wasn't just hidden for protection. It was hidden to keep a part of history secret. A secret that someone didn't want to be found. Rick left the building hours later, not accused of anything, but changed. The past once thought to be finished, was knocking on his door again. And it wasn't just his past, it was his father's too. A past that might have been full of more mystery than Rick ever imagined. He got into his car and sat behind the wheel for a long time before turning the key. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his eyes stared ahead, but his mind was far away, lost in memories, trying to piece together a puzzle that had just begun to form. Rick Harrison drove home with a heavy heart, and the questions in his mind were louder than the sound of the engine. Every street he passed, every light he stopped at, felt like a part of a strange journey he never meant to take. The photo of his father and the man the FBI had shown him kept flashing in his head. It wasn't just the picture that disturbed him, it was the fact that someone had connected his father to something hidden, something possibly illegal, something buried in their own home. It was like finding out the man who taught you everything had lived a secret life you never saw. Rick tried to tell himself there had to be an explanation. His father was a straight man, someone who always reminded Rick to keep his business clean, to never deal in stolen goods, to always ask questions when something didn't feel right. But now the same man was being tied to lost artifacts, items that vanished from history and somehow ended up under the floor of their home. As Rick pulled into the driveway, the house looked different again. Not because anything had changed on the outside, but because it no longer felt like a place of peace. It felt like a place of secrets. When he stepped inside, the silence hit him like a wall. He walked straight to the room where the floor had been torn up. The plastic sheet still covered it, and for a moment, he just stood there, staring at it. The space didn't just feel like part of the house anymore. It felt like the entrance to a story he didn't understand. He sat down beside it, trying to remember everything he could about his father. The way he talked, the way he worked, the things he said when no one else was around. Rick suddenly remembered one night, when he was a teenager, his father had come home late, covered in dust, holding an old wooden box that he locked inside a cabinet without a word. Rick had asked what it was, and his father had smiled and said, "Just something from the past, nothing to worry about." He never opened that box again in front of Rick. Back then Rick hadn't thought much of it. But now, looking back, that small moment felt different. Could that box have held something connected to the hidden one the FBI took? Could his father have been quietly protecting something all those years, or hiding it? The line between the two felt thinner than ever. Rick's thoughts were broken by a knock at the door. His heart jumped. He wasn't expecting anyone, and after everything that had happened, even a simple knock made him nervous. He opened the door slowly, and found an older man standing there. The man introduced himself with a name Rick didn't recognize, but then he said something that made Rick freeze. "I knew your father." Rick didn't know whether to invite him in or shut the door, but curiosity won. The man stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the house like it brought back memories. He sat down with a sigh, and looked at Rick with quiet seriousness. He said he used to work with Rick's father, not in the pawn business, but in another kind of work, something that involved finding rare things, old things, things that sometimes weren't meant to be found. He didn't go into full detail, but what he did say was enough to shake Rick. He said the past had finally caught up, and the box under the floor wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning, something that was hidden because it had the power to hurt people, not just legally, but emotionally. The man said Rick's father had once been part of a group that searched for lost historical items, things taken from old places, war zones, forgotten vaults, and sometimes those things ended up in hands that shouldn't have them. At some point, Rick's father got out. He wanted a clean life, a better life for his family. That's why he opened the shop. That's why he never talked about the past. But one thing he couldn't do was get rid of the box. It was too dangerous to destroy, too important to sell, so he did the only thing he could. He buried it under the floor of the place he trusted most, his home. Rick listened in silence, the words hitting him like waves. It made sense in a strange, painful way. His father wasn't a thief. He was a man who had seen too much and wanted to leave it behind. But even leaving it behind meant carrying a secret for the rest of his life. Rick asked the man why he had come now, after all these years. The man said he saw the news, heard whispers from people who still followed the trail of those lost artifacts. When the FBI got involved, he knew it had to be that box. He said there were others who might still be looking for it, others who believed it held more than just objects. It held proof, maybe even names. And if that proof came out, it could cause real problems. For people in power, for people who had built their lives on lies. Rick sat there, stunned. The story was bigger than he thought. Bigger than the house, the floor, or even his father. It was about choices made long ago, and the ripple effects they left behind. He looked at the floor again, but this time, it felt like a grave. Not of a person, but of a memory, of a truth that was finally starting to rise to the surface. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he had to keep digging, not with his hands but with his heart. Because somewhere in all this mystery was the real story of his father, and Rick needed to know who the man really was, not just as a dad, but as a human who carried something deep, something silent, and something that refused to stay hidden forever. Rick Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just crossed into a world he didn't recognize. The conversation with the old man had left him with more questions than answers, and as he sat in his living room later that night, the weight of the mystery felt heavier than ever. His father, the man he thought he knew so well, had been hiding something dangerous, a secret tied to artifacts, history, and a group of people who could cause trouble if they knew the box had been found. But the more Rick thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. If his father had truly wanted to escape his past, why hadn't he told Rick? Why hadn't he warned him about the danger that might one day resurface? Rick knew his father wasn't perfect, but the idea that he'd kept such a big secret made him feel like he'd never really known the man who raised him. Every memory of his father now felt distant, like they had been living separate lives all along. He thought about the night his father had brought home the strange wooden box. He'd locked it away without a word, acting like it was just another one of the things he collected. But now Rick wondered if it was more than that. What if the box wasn't just a part of his father's work, but a reminder of something darker he wanted to leave behind? As Rick walked around the house, looking at the walls, the furniture, the place that had once felt like a refuge, it now seemed like a cage. Every corner, every room full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. His thoughts kept circling back to the FBI agents, the way they looked at each other when they found the box, their expressions that spoke volumes. They had seen something in that box, something that made them nervous, something they hadn't fully explained to Rick. He wondered if they knew more than they were letting on. He wondered if he was now a part of something much bigger than he could understand. Could it be that his father was not just involved in finding rare objects, but in something illegal, something that put them both in danger? Rick stood by the window and stared out into the night, wondering if anyone else would come looking for the box. The old man had warned him about people still hunting for it. People who might be watching, waiting for the right moment to claim it for themselves. Could they be close? Could someone already be on their way? The thought made Rick's heart race. He knew he needed answers, but where could he find them? He needed to talk to more people who knew about his father's past, people who might know what the box was really about. But something told him that asking too many questions could lead to even more danger. As the night dragged on, Rick couldn't sleep. His mind was spinning with possibilities. He thought about the old man's warning, about the artifacts and the people who still cared about them. What if those artifacts were worth more than money? What if they were the key to something bigger? Rick felt a strange mix of anger and fear bubbling up inside him. His father had hidden the truth for years, but now it was his turn to uncover it. He had to know why the box had been buried, why it was so important, and what it meant for his future. The next morning, Rick decided to take action. He couldn't sit back and wait for something to happen. He needed to find out what the box was truly about. He started with his father's old contacts, reaching out to anyone who might have known him back in the day. Some people wouldn't take his calls, others hung up as soon as they heard his name. But Rick wasn't giving up. He kept searching, following small clues, connecting dots that didn't seem to make sense at first. One name kept coming up, a man who had worked with his father decades ago, someone who had vanished without a trace. Rick decided to track him down. The search led him to a small town on the outskirts of the state, a place he had never heard of before. The town felt forgotten, like it had been left behind by time. It was the kind of place where people didn't ask questions, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where secrets had a way of staying buried. Rick spent hours talking to locals, asking about the man his father had worked with. Some people remembered him, some people didn't. But one elderly woman in a faded blue dress told Rick a story that made his blood run cold. She spoke of a man who had been part of a group that searched for treasures long lost to history. She spoke of the kinds of things that were dangerous to find, things that had been taken from ancient cultures, stolen from places that shouldn't be disturbed. The woman's eyes darkened as she spoke of the man, describing him as someone who had been involved in something much larger than a simple treasure hunt. He had connections, dangerous connections. People who didn't care about history, only about power. Rick's mind raced as the woman spoke. Could his father have been involved with these people? Could he have known that the box under the floor wasn't just an artifact, but a link to something much darker? The more Rick learned, the more the pieces started to fall into place. He realized that the box wasn't just a relic of the past, it was part of a story his father had been trying to keep from him. And now Rick was caught in the middle of it. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know who was on his side, or who might be out to use him to get to what was hidden in that box. But one thing was clear, his search for answers was just beginning, and the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it was going to get. Rick uncovers the dark secrets of his father's past, revealing that the hidden box is tied to dangerous people and stolen artifacts with immense power. As he delves deeper, he realizes he's now a part of something bigger than he ever imagined. With enemies watching his every move, with no way to turn back, Rick must confront the truth, face the danger, and decide how far he's willing to go to uncover the full story.